My name is Eric Smith, and this is an excerpt from my pet project, Stories from Q-Ville. Gale had spent much of her life traveling. She grew up in West Newbury, Massachusetts, but her family didn't stay there long. As a child, her parents toted her all over the United States and Canada. As an adult, she went out of her way to collect knowledge. Information drew Gale. She met her husband in a small city in upstate New York. They spent several years there, where Gale worked in a school library while their children grew up. When her daughter left for university, she and her husband Gerald traveled to Asia. While in Vietnam, Gerald got attacked by two Indo-Chinese tigers and suffered a painful death. Gale was deeply saddened but decided to continue that trip that Gerald had paid for. She got him cremated in Hanoi and traveled to Europe, still mourning. Gale had read about many fantastical places while working in libraries, for she had been working in libraries around the world. Wherever she traveled and needed money, she would find a position as a librarian or substitute teacher for a while. One of these fantastical places that interested her was a kingdom of Q-Ville. A year after her husband's unfortunate demise, she rented a plane to fly around the area that she had pinpointed Q-Ville to be, were it real. She believed that it could be, because she had seen much stranger things around the world. She did find Q-Ville, of course. Today, Gale was the national historian of Q-Ville. She lived in a small house on the bank of the river that separates the Isle of Inforgio and Kings Island. Her office is in the Q-Ville Services Building, downtown. Presently, Gale was on her way to Q-Ville School. It was 1:45 on a Tuesday, which meant that Ms. Wellman was teaching history class for the non-magical students of Q-Ville. She had already taught the younger primary students. They went home at noon, and Gale Wellman went to lunch at the Emerald Buffet. When she pulled into the teacher's parking lot outside the schoolhouse, she noticed the secondary teacher's assistant, Julia Percivilius, walking through the door that led to the teacher's office. "Good afternoon, Julia," Gale greeted her. "Hello, Miss Wellman." Julia smiled brightly. "How is your day going?" Walking through the office door, Gale replied, "Not bad. The primary students learned about the history of Grindelmeyer today." "Lovely," Julia grinned. "My last boyfriend lived in the village. He was a bellhop at the Salifa Island Resort." "I love that place," Gale said. "I stayed there for 2 weeks back when I first came to Q-Ville. I hadn't decided to stay yet, and the resort had a beautiful ocean view." "What are you teaching the secondary students today?" Julia asked. "I'm actually kind of excited for this afternoon's lesson. I'm going to talk about the vicious Queen Lyssandra." "The vampire lady that butchered 1,000 people?" Julia gasped. "Yes." When the older students had packed into their desks, Gale smiled and said, "Hello, class." "Hello, Miss Wellman," the class chimed in unison. "Last week we learned about Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler, who was voivode of Wallachia in the 15th century," Gale said to the collected. "He was a vampire, and not the only one that ruled a nation. Queen Lyssandra ruled this very kingdom not so long ago." Julia pressed a button on a remote control, and a picture of a sharp-toothed woman wearing a crown showed on the screen on the wall. Lyssandra Wiltshire was born in England in 1846, and married a vampire 20 years later. The vampire, Chester Lancashire, loved Lyssandra dearly and turned her. He planned to be by her side forever. In 1945, after World War II, she was placed in a land that King George VI had won in a bet with Francisco Franco. Lyssandra Wiltshire Lancashire became the royal ambassador to Inforgio. King George VI had no idea what he had unleashed on this unknown land. During the war, Chester had died. It was assumed that he was killed in a concentration camp, but that was not the truth. In reality, Lyssandra had ripped Chester's head off. She was rather bloodthirsty, and synthetic blood didn't exist yet. When she got to Inforgio, she set up shop in a small village, which is now the eastern desert, not far from a camp of cannibals. After the first week, nearly 40 cannibals had been slaughtered. Lyssandra named herself queen and forced the remaining cannibals to build her a large house, and she ruled ferociously. She maimed hundreds. She castrated the islanders. She ate centaurs at feasts. She was absolutely terrifying to all. All this time, Lyssandra had no idea that her brother was hunting her. He had seen what she was capable of, and knew that she couldn't be allowed to continue in this manner. The problem was that Jeremiah Wiltshire didn't know that she was hiding in a hidden country. He had chased her to Portugal, but was lost from there. It took him several years to find the queendom. Jeremiah didn't know how to get close to her, so he found a home on the opposite shore of a nearby island. He spent 10 years in this cottage. He eventually found a wife and had 2 kids. His wife was named Sumer Smythe and had grown up in the village on Salifa Island. Their sons, Stanley and Stephen, looked like the spitting image of Jeremiah. In 1966, Jeremiah decided to talk to the new Queen of Great Britain, Queen Elizabeth II, about the problem of his sister and the carnage she had caused. He sent a letter to London. Jeremiah would never read Queen Elizabeth's response, however. Lyssandra found him and murdered him. She then murdered Sumer for good measure. Within a week, Stephen and Stanley Wiltshire had worked up a plan. They knew that Queen Lyssandra would be looking for them, so they wanted to be ready when she did. Muckluck the wizard, who had been a friend to Jeremiah, had magically modified the Wiltshire's house so that it was now a castle. That night, Lyssandra came. She had heard about the construction of the castle and hadn't approved it herself. The large wooden doors were open. Stupid humans, she thought. Why not just invite me inside? She thought that this was going to be easy. When she walked through the large doors, she was standing in a throne room. What? Is someone planning to usurp my position? She couldn't have that. You're a terrible person and a bad queen, Stanley shouted from a corner. From the opposite corner, Muckluck pointed his wand at Lyssandra and froze her in place. This cannot hold me for long, mage, she screamed. I will eat your face when I get free. Unperturbed, the wizard said, I only need to hold you until dawn, vampire bitch. What then? Queen Lyssandra laughed. What shall that do? We're inside. I know, Muckluck smiled and pointed his wand at the ceiling, which had vanished. When the sun started to rise, the excruciatingly loud screams of the queen could be heard from all over the village. Over the following weeks, Queen Elizabeth II announced that the archipelago of Inforgio was now a free state. The people of Salifa Island and the now renamed King's Island voted to remain a monarchy. Stanley Wiltshire was the first in line to the throne. Lyssandra did not have any offspring.